Welcome to the FroSci Section 13 podcast. This episode is a combination of the best speakers sharing their wisdom on a multitude of topics, such as unanswered questions about dreams, memories, attention span, as well as music's influence on studying, AI environmental footprint, and how screens are affecting our minds. These topics may uncover some insightful tools you can use in your life, or not. Anyways, relax, grab some drinks, snacks, whatever, and let's get this thing started.
Have you ever woken up in a rage, clammy hands, feeling flustered, not ready for the day, a result of the bad dream that you had the night before?
Or sometimes you wake up with a grin on your face, because last night you married a celebrity, you moved to Hawaii, you aced your FroSci final, and then being faced by the overwhelming disappointment that it is in fact a random Tuesday and you have 8 a.m. class.
Studies have shown that our dreams do seem to have some effect on our morning state, and not only on how well rested we are. Funnily enough, since around 3000 BC in Babylonia, this impact has been explored. Back then, though, dreams were taken as messages from the gods. It's only in the early 20th century, with Freud's interpretation of dreams, that people began taking a scientific approach. And that's the approach that we took, which led us to our question: do your dreams actually influence your mood the next morning? The claim that we're evaluating is that dreaming has a direct effect on our waking mood.
So Javier, what's the main idea?
The idea behind all three studies is something scientists like to call the continuity hypothesis. The idea that your dream life and waking life are connected through emotions.
To simplify the idea of this hypothesis, think of it like emotional carryover. Your dream might seem like nonsense, but your brain is actively processing the emotions that you experience within it, which end up impacting your mood the next day.
The first study we examined was really interesting. It had participants write down their dreams every morning. Then researchers used text analysis software to score how positive or how negative each dream was. So Javier, tell me, what pattern emerged?
Dev, the pattern that emerged was clear. Negative dreams led to worse morning mood, and positive dreams led to better morning mood.
That's a major statement to make, Javier, and fortunately, the findings can attest to it. The results that we found were statistically significant, with a p-value less than 0.001, and we know top scientists love a p-value below 0.05. Overall, the authors were able to conclude that dream emotions do shape how your day starts.
The next study analyzes what actually predicts that mood effect. It discusses how intense the emotions involved are.
A mildly annoying dream? Whatever. A dream where you feel full body terror because you woke up in a ween? That terrible feeling will stay with you throughout the following morning.
High-intensity emotions such as fear, grief, and joy lead to stronger effects on the next morning, regardless of whether it's positive or negative.
This study basically confirmed that your brain does, in fact, have a greater response to emotional intensity.
The third study looked at mood regulation, and here's the wild part. People consistently rated their own dreams as more positive than external judges.
Did you know, Dev, that that's called a positivity bias? It's basically your brain saying, okay, that dream wasn't great, but let's round up and end on a positive note.
Intuitively, people with a stronger positivity bias tended to report better morning moods.
It suggests the brain may be conducting an emotional cleanup process while you sleep.
Ooh.
After putting all the studies together, you get a complete loop. Your waking emotions shape your dreams, and your dreams shape your waking mood the next day.
No reset button at bedtime. Emotional waves just keep rolling through the 24-hour cycle. Javier, what do you think this means for the future?
You know, that's interesting. I think this could mean that our dreams might be able to play a bigger role in emotional health than what one would think. I think they could even be used for therapeutic practices in the future.
Wait, we've covered a lot of info. What does this actually mean for listeners out there?
If you wake up confused about your mood, maybe it's due to the dream that you don't remember.
And if you're a vivid dreamer, your brain might be subconsciously using dreams to rehearse emotions or regulate stress.
What we've been trying to say is that dreams aren't a random process that just transport you from the last night to the next morning. It's part of how your brain actively processes and organizes your emotions. So, if this episode made you rethink your dreams, send it to the friend who never remembers their dreams. They may not know it, but they're still influenced by them.
Follow us on Instagram for more weekly psychology updates, as well as tickets to our upcoming speaker series featuring faculty including Dr. Connie Svab and Professor Luca Aimi. Also, make sure to subscribe to our podcast's YouTube channel so you don't miss out on our next discussion on the mind and behavior.
And if you want your dream featured in a future episode, DM us your strangest dream. Thanks for listening, and try paying attention to your dreams tonight so you can test our hypothesis yourself.
And we hope you
Dream a little dream of me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Tune In and Lock In. Today we're tackling one of the biggest student debates. Should you study with music or is silence better?
We're digging into the claim that music helps you focus, what the evidence actually says, and how it can guide the way you study. Lock in and listen to find out whether your playlist is helping or distracting you.
Let's tune in.
Listening to music can be beneficial while studying, but its positive impact has limits depending on how it is used.
We explore how lyrics, genres, and even your own music taste affect memory and concentration.
And our preferred music and the type of task you're doing can change everything.
So one of the most important studies we looked at was published in the Journal of Cognition in 2023. In it, college students did memory tests, reading comprehension, and math problems under 3 conditions. For reading, students scored about 94% accuracy in silence, 95% with instrumental music, but that dropped to around 93% when lyrics were playing.
The researchers said music with lyrics consistently caused a negative effect size on memory and reading tasks.
Lyrics create verbal interference. Your brain is trying to process the song words and the text in front of you at the same time, which is why it slows everything down.
And what's interesting is that instrumental music didn't really help or hurt. The effect sizes were small.
So, if your task involves reading, writing, or remembering things, the data is pretty clear. Lyrics make performance worse, even if you feel like they don't.
Introverts and extroverts supposedly think differently, right? A 2011 study from Psychology of Music decided to put that to the test by having 58 students complete tasks while listening to different types of music.
However, the results showed that personality didn't actually matter. What did matter was the type of music. What we can learn is that lyrics and music make reading and language processing harder.
What's weird is that students still believed music helped them study verbal tasks, as in the post-test survey, 74% said they often study with music, and 59% say that they think music improves their work. On the other hand, for the diagrammatic logic test, silence was the worst. Students studying with the instrumental music had the highest of all conditions and 240% better than in silence.
What we can learn is that lyrics hurt verbal work, instrumental music might help logic, and introverts and extroverts aren't as different as we thought.
Me, along with most other students, have a study playlist. Does preferred background music impact the distribution of attentional and task-focused states compared to states of mind-wandering and external distraction?
In the article evaluated, 40 students completed a simple attention task in silence and with their chosen background music, and were then asked thought-probe statements, providing subjective reports to classify thoughts such as, I'm distracted by sights or sounds.
It was found that preferred background music increased the proportion of task-focused states and decreased mind-wandering compared to silence. While this suggests that listening to music you like can make it easier to concentrate, this study was done with low-risk simple tasks.
This is supported with the inverted U-curve model, finding that the less complex the task, the more positive the influence of music can be expected to be. Also, familiarity with the music increases emotional arousal and pleasure, and in turn decreases stress. So the real question isn't, does music help? It's what kind of music helps you when you're doing this specific task. Another article covered how music affects the brain, and it showed something pretty interesting. When you focus on something structured like music, the brain lights up in multiple areas at once. Right, and a point that surprised me was how the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex stayed active, even after long periods of time. These fortunately happen to be the systems we use to hold information while studying.
The study also found that the motor parts of the brain actually phase lock to the rhythm. Phase lock is essentially when the brain syncs itself with patterns when it's paying attention. So when you're studying with steady, structured music, your brain will adapt and in the focused rhythm too.
The study basically shows that music can activate the same attention and active memory networks you use while studying. So combining the two can help your brain stay engaged, organized, and mentally in sync, which can make it a lot easier to focus.
Alright, here's a simple breakdown. Music can help, but only in certain situations. It works best for simple or repetitive tasks, physical work, or when you just need a little motivation, especially if it's instrumental or low tempo.
So overall, studying with music depends on the task and the person.
If you're going to use music, stick with instrumentals or familiar music. Keep the volume low and pick slower beats.
Just experiment and see what actually helps you lock in. Now it's your turn. Build a study playlist with us.
Add your favorite study songs to our shared Spotify playlist so we can create a focused soundtrack together.
And if you want something more unique, how about a study buddy match?
Fill out the quick survey linked in our episode description and we'll match you with another listener. You can swap playlists and help each other out.
Thanks for joining us as we explore the science behind music and focus.
Whether you study in silence or blast your playlist, we hope this episode helped you understand why your brain works the way it does.
So until then,
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in.
Zoning out.
Hi kitties, welcome to Therapaw. My name is Ricardo and I'm your therapist today. I'm honored to introduce to you three brilliant scientists, Rianne, Lydia, and Ogden. They will help me and you evaluate the claim that TikTok and other short-form video content negatively impacts our attention spans. In this article taken from the Social Science Research Network, it discusses that TikTok primarily impacts attention spans due to its rapid content delivery. The fast-paced, reward-driven environment trains the brain to expect constant novelty, diminishing the ability of people to maintain focus on tasks requiring concentration for long periods of time. This claim is further explained by Emma Lewis in her TED Talk, Does Your Kid Have the Attention Span of a Goldfish? Different fronts of research that will be mentioned later in this episode will contribute converging evidence to support this claim. However, some research offers a nuanced view suggesting that short-form content can be utilized in a creative light and in educational settings, improving attention flexibility. So Rianne, can you explain how TikTok affects the brain?
Actually, you know what? I would love to answer your question. TikTok and other short-form content use can literally make you think less. But don't just take my word for it. Look at the evidence. A study looked at the brain activity of people with social media addiction during an attention-based task. Now, the prefrontal cortex deals with cognitive control, memory, and of course, attention. This activity can be measured in the strength of frontal theta power. This study determined that the participants with increased social media addiction spent the same amount of cognitive effort on simple and complex tasks. In sum, the use of reels can trick your brain into being lazy and using less brain power across the board. Think about it this way. Imagine your brain is like the ruler of a kingdom. Rulers have so many responsibilities, including diplomacy. To speed things up, you have a butler summarize all your duties so you can get to everything. You get so used to having your information given to you on a silver platter that you can no longer process things that take up more time. So when you get to this diplomatic meeting between forward land and backward land, you fall asleep. The two nations take it as a sign of disrespect and they end up waging war on you. In real life, instead of dealing with war, you would probably flunk your school assignments because Insta-reels have fried your brain. I haven't dealt with war, but I have struggled with doing work due to a short attention span, and I can imagine that one sucks more.
Would you all like to get into the Tell Me What's Wrongs?
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically, the kiddies send in Tell Me What's Wrongs, and it's our duty to prescribe something to them. And this is the first one from Yosef. Hey Ricardo, I'm having trouble maintaining focus on reading the Iliad, and now I failed a quiz. At this point, I'm ready to drop out. If you have any advice, please let me know. I'm desperate. Oh my god, what a dilemma. Lydia, do you have any thoughts on what we could do about this?
Yes, let me tell you about it. So according to a recent study by EJAL, consuming short-form videos like TikTok videos and Instagram Reels is strongly linked to shorter attention spans and lower academic performance. The study aimed to investigate the impact of short reels on attention span and academic performance of undergraduate students. What they found is that students who spent more time watching short-form videos had a reduced attention span, and they also found that there was a negative link between the time spent watching reels and a student's GPA, meaning that students who expose themselves more often to reels and just any short form type of content video attained lower grades. And you might be wondering, how is this even possible? And I know some of you might argue that TikTok, for example, can be very informative and educational. And while I agree with that view, there's something deeper than this that the scientists found. They pointed out the cognitive load theory, which explains how our brains have a limited attention span. That said, when we constantly expose it to fast, bite-sized entertainment, the capacity for longer, deep activities like studying shrinks. Short-form videos are not the only reason why students suffer from low attention spans. Sleep is another problem, an even bigger one, I would say. Without proper rest, how can we expect our minds to function the way we need them to?
Thank you for such a beautiful explanation. Now let's move on to the next Tell Me What's Wrong.
Let's hear it.
How Hi, my cousin posts on TikTok a lot, and I like to keep up with what she's doing, but I have to hide it from my mom because she thinks TikTok destroys my brain. How should I balance staying in touch with my cousin while not doom scrolling?
That's a complicated situation, but let me offer some advice. As you've learned by now, consuming a lot of short-form content does worsen your attention span, but there are ways to avoid these negative side effects by not consuming addictively. In an article titled TikTok Use and Psychosocial Factors Among Adolescents, Comparisons of Non-Users, Moderate Users, and Addictive Users, and published by the Psychiatry Research Journal, scientists asked 1,366 students to self-rank themselves from 1 to 5 on different scales related to short-form content consumption, perceived attention span, mental health conditions, family life, and more, aiming to compare the data and find connections between short-form content consumption versus the other categories. In the end, the scientists determined that, as we know, addictive consumption of short-form content will have a negative impact on your attention span, among other areas. However, interestingly, they also found that the results for those they deemed moderate and non-users did not vary much at all. In other words, the negative impacts experienced by consuming short-form content to a moderate amount won't hurt your attention span compared to not using it at all. The impacts are the same. Basically, this means that you can continue to watch your cousin's TikToks as long as you're not watching these videos addictively. However, if you are concerned about your usage slipping into addiction, I would prescribe a video called How Do You Know If You're Addicted to Something by Chris Mackey Psychology, which explains the common signs of addiction and how to stay aware of possible addictive behaviors. Hope this helps, and good luck with your mom.
Okay, that was all for today's episode of Therapaw. Don't forget to submit a Tell Me What's Wrong at pastthatpod.com, and stay safe and stay off those phones, or at least use them moderately.
All right.
Bye, kitties.
Bye, kitties.
Can we really trust the accuracy of our memory? If you've ever been in a family feud before, you may have some strong feelings on this very topic.
Often, we remember the same events experienced at the same time differently, making memory feel subjective and heavily influenced by our own biases, perspectives, and processing. We'll be going through 3 case studies today to explore this question, backing up this conclusion with empirical evidence in the process.
Well then, let's get to it. First, let's talk about how we make memories and what makes them memorable. Our memory is incredibly important to everything we do in our lives. From when we wake up in the morning, we remember where our toothbrush is, how to make eggs for breakfast, or how we're going to get to work or class that day. But we probably think a lot less about how we remember these things. The process by which we make memories is called encoding. This is when we take in visual, audio, or semantic information and store it in our brain for future retrieval. For example, when you meet a new person in college, you may recognize their face on campus. But now let's talk about more of our memory's accuracy. Dr. Kelly of Florida State University ran an experiment on adults based on memory recollection. The participants were given information and after a set period were asked to answer questions based on what they remembered from that information. At first, she forced participants to answer every question, no matter how confident they were in the answer. Next, she allowed participants to freely report the answers. What they found was that when adults were allowed to freely report the answers, they were more accurate and confident in their answers. This demonstrates that we have an inherent ability to judge our own memories on accuracy. Next, Dr. Kelly ran an experiment where one group was fully attentive while given information and the other had divided attention while they were given the information. She found that the fully attentive group had better recall of memories, which shows that deliberate, focused processing is important to memory collection. But our memory could also be affected by environmental factors. The Mayo Clinic lists 7 factors that greatly affect memory, including physical activity, mental activity, socialization, organization, sleep, diet, and mental health. What this goes to say is there are many factors that influence memory and how memorable and accurate they are.
Now, let's talk about how memory is an edit, not a recording, and why remembering changes the story. Have you ever argued with a friend about a memory? You're so sure it happened one way, they're sure it happened another. Well, neuroscience studies suggest you might both be wrong. We used to think long-term memories were permanent, like a book on a shelf, but a classic 2000 study done by researchers Nader, Schaaf, and Joseph proved otherwise. Researchers gave rats a lasting fear memory. Days later, they triggered the rats to recall that fear, but right at that moment, they injected a drug, anisomycin, into the amygdala to block the proteins needed to receive the memory. The result? The memory was essentially deleted. The rats had total amnesia. This proved that recalling a memory doesn't just play it back, it makes it fragile, forcing the brain to resave it, and in that window, it can be changed. Think of it like this. Remembering is less like playing a video file and more like opening a document, editing it slightly every time you go back to look at it and saving over the original. Their discovery opened the door to revolutionary treatments. Researchers like Professor Elaine Brunet are now using reconsolidation therapy to help people with PTSD. Patients recall their trauma while on the safe drug that blocks the emotional part of the memory from being resaved. Then the facts remain, but the traumatic feeling associated with the memory is edited out. So, the next time you replay a memory in your mind, know this: you aren't just a viewer. You're actively changing them. Our memories aren't perfect recordings of the past. They are stories we tell ourselves, and the story changes every time we tell it.
Finally, let's pivot to the idea of perspective and the influences it can have on what and how we remember. If you know what an out-of-body experience is, congrats! You're already familiar with one of the two perspectives Petra Marcotti and Peggy St. Jacques of the University of Sheffield analyzed in a 2018 paper on memory accuracy and vividness. In two experiments, these researchers asked subjects to complete a task and to remember doing it in one of two forms, as they witnessed it from their own eyes, or by shifting their perspective to an out-of-body observer. After a week, they provided either photo, title and description, or solely description cues to prompt recall of the task in the subject's assigned perspective. They also had them rate the vividness of these memories, among other things, and tested them on their accuracy in remembering the task. After conducting these experiments and putting together their findings, they reached some important conclusions. In both experiments, they verified that yes, shifting from an own eyes to observer perspective reduced memory accuracy. They also learned that differences in non-shifted versus shifted accuracy track closely with the vividness participants assign their memory. Each of these findings are important in their own right, providing converging evidence for the claim that memory is far from a concrete, objectively accurate picture of reality. Still, the process of science is never done. There's still so much to be learned in this emerging area of study, and you, yes, you, can be a part of this through a current Cambridge project, gathering data via survey about participants' most vivid memories. If you're interested, please check our bio for the link. Also, follow us here on Spotify and on IG at Mysteries and Memory Pod.
And the first 10 people who comment amygdala on this video will receive a free life-size brain squishy as a promotion. We will DM the lucky winners for details on mailing information.
Thank you again for listening, and episode 2 will be released on December 21st.
Did you know that AI is killing the earth and our bodies? Today we are exposing the dirty side of data and diving into what researchers really say about the growth of AI in data centers and how it causes measurable harm to our environment and health.
Artificial intelligence has exploded over the past decade. Modern AI relies on machine learning, huge datasets, and massive networks of computers that run 24/7. These systems live in data centers, giant warehouse-sized facilities filled with servers that make our digital world possible.
As AI advances faster than ever, these data centers are multiplying across the country. But with that growth comes hidden consequences: polluted water, high energy consumption, air pollution, and real risks to human health. Today we're exploring how AI's rise affects our environment and what we can do about it.
Data centers might not look like much from the outside, but inside they're packed with powerful computers that constantly run calculations, store data, and power everything from TikTok to ChatGPT. According to the environmental footprint of data centers in the United States by Sadiq, Shahabi, Martson, and Horvath, U.S. data centers already consume massive amounts of energy, especially in drought-prone regions like the Southwest. Nearly 50% of servers are fully or partially powered by power plants located in water-stressed regions, which means that the operation of these data centers can increase local water scarcity and put additional pressure on already limited water resources. The energy and water demands of the U.S. data centers could contribute to pollution levels that drive $20 billion a year in health-related costs by 2028. Researchers like Sadiq and his co-authors argue that the tech industry needs to rethink where and when AI training takes place.
Beyond energy consumption and unsustainability, data centers also contribute to air pollution, especially in cities. Research from the APIA Multi-City Project, published by Issa Moli and others, found strong connections between fine particulate matter and increased mortality in urban areas.
This ties into the fact that data centers can emit pollutants through diesel backup generator testings and emergencies, as well as the fossil fuel power plants where combustion is a major source of fine particulate matter. While this study was focused on European cities, the implications matter everywhere, as many data centers are built near large populations, including cities like Chicago, LA, and New York, placing millions at higher risk.
Another concern is PFAS, which are commonly called forever chemicals. These chemicals are often used in data centers. A study in which researchers tested how exposure to PFAS affected health outcomes, specifically focusing on its impact on kidneys, determined that PFAS indeed induced adverse health effects. Their study saw that exposure to PFAS type PFOA was positively correlated with renal cancer, or cancer of the kidneys. The research compared renal cell carcinoma cases with PFAS exposure, and exposure to PFOA was shown repeatedly to be a risk for this disease. However, it is of note that those who operate data centers are not required to report which PFAS they use, so PFOA might not be the PFAS type that they use.
When researching the connection between AI, data centers, and public health, we can see how harmful AI use is not only to our environment, but to our health as well. A recent study published in Archive Cornell by Hahn and other researchers estimated that pollution from U.S. data centers could cause over 600,000 asthma cases and 1,300 premature deaths annually by 2028. These impacts would also disproportionately affect low-income communities and those already vulnerable to air quality issues. While these findings are concerning, the studies also pose potential solutions. Researchers suggest a strategy called health-informed computing, which means being intentional about when and where AI work will occur. Impacts on health decrease when data centers run their most energy-intensive tasks, at times when the power grid is cleaner or in areas that don't rely heavily on fossil fuels. They also recommend making AI models more efficient and encourage companies to be more transparent about their pollution and health impacts. Overall, we don't have to stop using AI, but we should try to design and schedule it in ways that reduce harm to people and our environment.
AI is undeniably important for innovation. It powers medical research, education, art, and many other technologies. It has already impacted the future of science, but with its environmental footprint growing, we have to use it more intentionally. Be aware of your usage and refrain from using it often. Small daily tasks like constant AI inquiries can worsen pollution and its health risks. Stay informed about this new technology. There's an insufficient amount of studies for how it's impacting our society and Earth. Therefore, using it recklessly can result in unanticipated consequences.
Thanks for joining us today as we explore how the digital world shapes our physical one. The future of AI shouldn't come at the cost of our planet or our health.
And welcome back to How Screens Shape the Growing Mind. I'm Zach, and I'm here with
Santiago,
Jackson,
and Neil.
Today we're digging into a claim you've probably heard of a million times. Too much screen time hardens the developing brain. Is that real? Is it media panic, or somewhere in between? Let's break down what the science actually says, what's exaggerated, and what parents should really take away.
So first, let's establish what's happening. A child's brain is not simply a small version of an adult brain. It is actively organizing itself. Connections that are being utilized become stronger, while those that are not being used tend to be ignored. One of the most significant studies we examined was one published by the Psychological Medicine Department at the Cambridge University Press. It demonstrated that children spending more time reading with their parents correlated to an advanced development of language and emotion-related pathways within the brains of children, but these pathways became underdeveloped if passive screen time substituted this reading time. This is pretty alarming since around 50% of teens use their screens for 4 hours or more a day, according to the CDC. Then again, just because screens cause this to happen doesn't mean they destroy the brain, or anything else for that matter. Nonetheless, it does suggest that what screens replace might be more important than the screen time itself.
Right. Right, and when people hear screens harm the brain, they picture something dramatic, like iPads melting kids' neurons. But what researchers actually look at is how screens relate to the structure and the function of the brain. For example, a 2019 JAMA pediatric study found that preschoolers who spend more time on screens had less developed white matter pathways used for language in early reading. White matter is basically the brain's wiring. The more organized it is, the better different languages communicate. That sounds concerning, but here's the catch. The kids with the most screen time also had less parent interaction, less reading time, and more stress at home. So it's hard to tell whether screen time is that cause or just part of a bigger picture. Another study from 2023 found that infants with higher early screen exposure showed different EEG activity related to attention later on. But once again, it was a correlation, not actual proof that screens alone caused the change. So overall, the evidence shows a real connection between heavy screen use and brain development, But it points to association, not clear causation, which is why context is key here.
Exactly, and this is where things can get interesting. Because even though a lot of people assume screen time is automatically harmful to the brain, the evidence is much more mixed. The BBC recently pointed out in an article, what screen time does to children's brains is more complicated than it seems, and that's exactly right. Some studies show that excess screen time has no strong negative effects at all, and what really matters isn't just the number of hours kids spend on devices, but the quality of what the kids are doing on the screens. For example, high-quality interactive apps can actually support language development. Video chatting helps build and maintain social connection, especially growing children. Educational content can strengthen vocabulary. And as children get older, digital devices such as art apps, coding programs, or video editing tools can help activate a whole different set of cognitive and problem-solving skills. So the idea that screens are always bad is not necessarily true. What research consistently shows is that passive screen use, such as having the TV on in the background and endless scrolling on social media, is where the problems tend to show up. That kind of use is linked to poorer and smaller attention spans, less sleep, and slower learning. But interactive or educational screen time can be neutral or even have positive effects on the minds of growing children. In the end, what the screen is being used for matters a lot more than the screen itself.
And before we jump into what the official guidelines say, quick reminder, we actually built a course for parents on managing screen time in a healthy, realistic way. If you want practical tools, checklists, and real research explained clearly, it's all there for just $15,000 a month.
Thank you, Jackson. Here's what my study focused on. What happens when screen time starts really early, like in infancy? Researchers followed families in Singapore from when the kids were babies all the way to around age 9. They tracked how much time the infants got, and they used EEG, basically a tool that picks up the brain's electrical activity, to see if any patterns showed up later. And what they saw was pretty interesting. Babies with more screen time showed different brain signals, and those patterns were connected to slightly weaker attention and problem solving as they got older. It's not proof that screens caused that. The study can't say that. But it definitely suggests that heavy screen use in the first couple of years might shape how those attention systems develop. So for infants, keeping screens limited is probably the safer move.
So after looking at all the data, here's where we sit. Screens themselves aren't inherently harmful, but rather it's the overuse and lack of balance that matter.
Yeah, and kids' brains thrive on these day-to-day interactions, such as talking, problem-solving, playing, and reading. So screens can't replace these types of interactions. Nevertheless, they can supplement it if used appropriately.
The real danger is when screens become the default babysitter. But high-quality content plus engaged parenting, research says that's not harmful and can even be helpful.
So the claim screen time harms the developing brain is partially true, but oversimplified. Too much passive screen time can absolutely have negative effects, but intentional use, especially when paired with parent involvement, doesn't show the same risks.
Thanks for listening to How Screens Shape the Growing Mind, and don't forget to use our hashtag #StopIPadKids on social media.
Wow, time sure does fly by. We're at the end of the episode, and if you're still listening, congratulations. You've just taken one step closer to strengthening your attention span. If one of the topics caught your attention more than others, remember, you can vote on whichever podcast you think was the best. And with that, I hope you all enjoyed. Happy Thanksgiving!